all these talks. Can you just explain the origin of Blazing Griffin, where you started and what it is that you do?
So I'm Justin Neil, co-head of games, co-heads of games at Blazing Griffin. So games is relevant because Blazing Griffin doesn't just do games, we also do film production and post-production. So we're three companies in one. So Blazing Griffin kind of has a two-pronged origin story. One is within the games team, Blazing Griffin, that started in 2011 in Edinburgh and originally started around publishing a title called The Ship and then working on a few indie games. And then in 2015 there was a merger of three companies who were each at a similar level, games, film production and post-production, to come together as a company that could be more than the sum of its parts. And from 2015 onwards there was a gradual, I suppose, transition to a little bit of a new operating model across the three companies. As the origin, I suppose, I'll stop there.
I mean, it's a strange one because neither Justin or I were there at the origin, so there's kind of our start, and then there's the company start, which predates us by a reasonable amount of time. And our start was kind of when you refocused to, I guess, a different kind of business model, and it kind of changed the way that the company operates now, and then kind of changed the way the team works, and a lot of things happened at that point that allowed us to refocus things and become the company we are now.
You mentioned that it's three companies merging. What were the challenges of doing that?
So it's interesting because they haven't merged. There are still three distinct companies, actually four distinct companies. The fourth is the group holding company. And there's something interesting in the cooperation between the companies. We are currently all under one roof, and there was a challenge in terms of previously was an Edinburgh office and a Glasgow office, and then a headquarters, a new site was found where we consolidated the post-production facility and the games team, and there was a challenge there in terms of relocating things under one roof. The additional challenges which I think we continue to face is our ambitions as I don't really want to say transmedia company, transmedia, cross-media company, multimedia company, and the reality of the landscape as it is. We each have separate clients, and I would say we're kind of all client-facing business. So post-production works with a variety of independent production companies, and they've done editing for Shetland, for Crime, for Vigil, and they are focused on their clients and generating work in the TV industry and film industry. And then film, the first film that they produced was Anna and the Apocalypse, which was a zombie Christmas musical, and it was a really great indie film, which did really well on the festival circuit. We had ambitions at the time of we could make a game of it, and we could make this large franchise of it. We found that generally, so far, the trend for transmedia projects have been franchise expansion, where you have properties like Star Wars, which have made $1 billion in their films. So obviously, you would do the game of that, and the kind of the funding's not really available for. And I'd say, not to dive into, but this I suppose is kind of the crux of where we are in our separate divisions. But not just the funding, but the structure of the funding isn't necessarily there for a transmedia project, because there is indie game funding, there's indie film funding. Those two funders don't talk to each other and have no interest in talking to each other, even if they're in the same company. So, and the Apocalypse film and game could have found two separate homes potentially, but nothing to do with each other, which is an interesting kind of dynamic of the landscape currently. And so while I say kind of we haven't quite merged, that we are trying to gear ourselves up towards working together on these properties as the industry itself evolves.
Yeah, and it just says it's currently, and you can see from where we started and things we were doing, like none of this existed. This idea, and it was all kind of a little bit of a pipe dream, but as we've gone, things are starting to change. And one of the more recent interesting ones that's changed is game tools are now being used in film and TV production quite extensively, you know, and that's kind of given us a little bit of a leg up. And when our film and TV arm are talking to people and we find out there's a game arm, it becomes a very interesting prospect. Our game artists have done virtual production work for film and TV, which has been really interesting using Unreal Engine, and that is something that has not completely made it over to the film and TV side. They're still working with fairly traditional models, so all of a sudden games from being this very distant relative is now actually in a very prominent position. And so you can kind of see where in you know, years time, the landscape will probably be very different, and hopefully at that point us as a company and our structure will be well primed to take advantage of it. You know, we're kind of working towards that. It's an ultimate goal, and it would be really cool if it happens, but for now we're still all doing our own things and hopefully kind of working and building the groundwork for these things.
You know, like you just said, you each do your own things, but why is it like, is there any sort of like knowledge sharing between different arms of the playing?
Yeah, I mean, we have kind of involved people from different teams. Like our artists are very useful for the other teams. That kind of comes up a lot. We did a project for Alae-Carew, which was an episodic detective narrative game, which we used film and TV writers from our film and TV side to write the overall season arc and kind of bring in that, which added a little bit more legitimacy to it, and it's kind of given us a little bit of foothold as a narrative company, which has been quite interesting. So we generally do try to consult with the other sides as much as possible and use that information if we can. But now, games are now becoming a bit more of a commodity from TV. They're coming to us, which is a nice kind of turnaround. So
I think, you know, there's a variety of formal and informal structures that we make use of internally in terms of, you know, formally we'll have a bi-weekly IP meeting, which is cross department. We'll also have a bi-weekly senior team where, you know, all the senior team of each department comes together to talk about various projects, but also informally, but there's a lot of value in us personally being close to the heads of the other departments and in the same building. So, you know, if someone in post-production hears about a new virtual production volume that's getting set up, they'll come over to our desk and we'll talk about it. Or if someone in the film side says that, oh yeah, I'm talking to someone who also is interested in games, can you talk to them? So there is quite a lot of value in some of those informal interactions. And also generally, us all being interested in a variety of media ourselves, which was also, I think, one of the creative impulses for the coming together of the companies, given that each of us, you know, as individuals, as consumers, consume across media. You know, we like games, we like TV shows and films and books, and there's something creatively engaging, I think, for all of us in the company, to be able to creatively engage in other media as well, not just their own markets.
And you know, looking at your portfolio, it's quite diverse. How do you decide this is a project for Griffin?
I suppose trying not to be too facetious about it in terms of if there's funding, we'll do it. You know, we are at a stage of the company where the way that we operate as a games team is that we look for opportunities to either fund our concepts, to work on someone else's concept, or to work together with someone else's team and support them. And there is a reality of being an indie developer and trying to grow as a company. That being said, we have a few different interests. as a team, we are interested in actually not necessarily pigeonholing us, and this is maybe, I don't really want to duck the question, but to say that we have an interest across platforms, and there's something creatively engaging just at looking at, for example, translating an IP from one form into another. Now, even if that's in the game space, so looking at, for example, a console game IP, bringing how would that translate into mobile, or looking at a digital board game, how would that translate into AR, or a theater production, how would that translate into VR? So we, a lot of that stuff is engaging for us generally. So yeah, it's hard to say that we just kind of like.
I mean, as just said, like we work in a lot of different areas and for a lot of different people, and we try. It's something we've been trying to do recently, of like actually quantifying that a little bit to kind of create a company statement, you know. And we do see ourselves as creative problem solvers, and people come to us. Like Agatha Christie came to us and they were like, we're trying to revitalize our brand. Like that's a big thing we're doing. We've got new TV shows and movies coming out, and we want to do something in the gaming space. And you know, we went away and kind of thought about that, and a lot of the emphasis from them was, you know, we could do an adaptation of one of our books or whatever. And we went back and said we would like to do something original. We pitched the idea of telling a completely original story and writing an original story, which is something that is kind of not the norm with them. They're reliving a lot of the classic stories and books, and we decided to try and write something original because you can't Google the ending to something original, right? So you've never seen the movie of it. And that was like a big thing for us, and we pitched that back as like, this is a better foothold for trying to create something new. Is this, you're moving into games as a new medium, let's do something new. For Apple Arcade, which is launching a subscription service, you know, they came to us and asked if we could bring a game that we're working on there, and we kind of changed that up a little bit so it became episodic. So we started releasing content regularly because that's the power of a subscription service. You've got your users that are staying there. You don't run the risk of a normal episodic thing, and it was received very, very well. And that's, you know, that's kept that game on that platform for like, I don't know, whatever it is, multiple years at this point. But it's done well, and we always try and take things and put our own spin on it and try and, you know, we do work for hire, but if you're coming to us, we're going to try and do something creative that fits with the skill sets that we have.
I'm going to return back to that sort of like transmedia, even though that's the right word to use it. Obviously, you have the experience in this, and there's a lot of conversations at the minute that are on about film, TV, and also just like you said, the game tech just being used, you know, even like architecture and things like that. So I'm just really wondering what your thoughts were, like how they develop in the future. I know you spoke on it a little bit, just but want to develop a little bit more on that.
I think there are a few different modes of thought when it comes to it. One thought is for each of the I suppose decision makers to see these various media forms as potentials in their own right. So I think the old model of franchise expansion was looking at the other media forms as bonuses, nice to haves. You know, if you can get A, then you can get B. And I think there's an interesting potential move into why not have both. And it's interesting to think of something like The Last of Us, for example. If those, if the TV show had come out, regardless of the game, would it have done well? And so there's an interesting thing from looking at an IP standpoint, doing both at the same time, but both in their own right. There's an interesting, both a de-risking, not to get too much from a portfolio angle, but there is a de-risking strategy there as you're looking at investing in an IP. And I think what we're increasingly seeing though is people understanding the value of IP on its own in a standalone manner. And interesting what Simon was mentioning about, you know, from game IP perspective and books, and you know, we've also seen comic books as, obviously such a great ground for IP. Do they go into TV? Do they go into games? Do they go into both at the same time? And I think with each example of a transmedia or maybe a franchise expansion model, we're getting closer to a greater alignment in release dates or funding to coincide, so that we're doing all of this regardless of how the other properties perform, because each in their own right can stand alone. So yeah, I think we might be seeing things which coincide a little bit more. There's still not to kind of go on this, but there's still some interesting theorizing to do in the connection between media forms. And obviously there was, I think, maybe even 10 years ago, there was a bunch of stuff around transmedia with like the Sci-Fi Channel and an MMO, and it didn't really work because I think each market is distinct, which is why I suppose I try to work more of a portfolio model than a weekly event where the TV show coincides. But again, there's some value in just upfront looking at the IP in a way that can envelop all media forms. So you're building the IP in a way sustain different outcomes. And that's why we're quite interested, I suppose, in story worlds and building worlds where you can interact in different ways. So there's, again, a bit of a ramble, but there is something interesting in the creative aspects of IP generation as well as the funding dynamic.
And think about being based in Glasgow. Do you still have your Edinburgh outfit, or is it just Glasgow now? Just Glasgow. I mean, why did you decide to locate in Glasgow, and what are the benefits and challenges?
I mean, being the company we are with the film and TV emphasis, the BBC offices are here, the Channel 4 offices are here, STV, this is the hub of film and TV for Scotland. So, if we were just a games company, then yeah, maybe we would be, but to try and kind of capture that and kind of, again, since the pandemic anyway, I'm sure a lot of people, we now have staff all over the place as well. We've made some really good hires in Belfast and down south and Dundee and all over the place, whereas there's still a very physical presence for film and TV in Scotland and Glasgow. We have our everything based in a big facility right here, so it kind of makes sense to be here. But there is a really nice growing industry or scene in Glasgow. It's quite get the attention of Dundee, and there is a good scene in Edinburgh. I think as Simon was saying, Rockstar kind of shadows that, but there is a really good scene there. But it is starting to kind of grow in Glasgow and become quite strong. And I guess we become part of that and make our home here and do it properly.
Like you said, he's a sense of film and TV as well. Have you had and managed to have those chances to keep work in film and TV? You have to come to piece up with it, but now you're kind of involved into it.
I mean, a lot comes from the office, the people that kind of come in and out of the office, but we're also not very far from the BBC or STV offices. And I was over at the Channel 4 offices last week for a meeting. So there's a lot more opportunity for that. You do get a little bit more media attention here sometimes as well, because you're just running the corner from the BBC, or you're just so people will reach out to us and there's someone there. So yeah, there are benefits to being here, I think.
I think the other thing to mention is also educational institutions. We work with some local universities and colleges, which has been useful in the area, being able to talk over, and that also both being here and having that film and TV angle has exposed us to the wider creative arts industry and initiatives around the creative arts industry, especially with regards to various innovations that may refer to specific things that are happening. So it has been useful.
It's just like I said, the funding is very structured and
yeah, interesting. The one thing I was referring to, not is it public knowledge in terms of there's a government funding for. Okay. Yeah. So there's the government are looking at funding a few virtual production sites around the country, and there are consortiums being formed around that. What's interesting about that is that it is, I want to say, kind of media agnostic. So with these sites, there is a game angle, there is a theatre angle, there is a film production angle, and so that tech side of things is really interesting when we look at technology innovation, how it might be used across various media.
And finally, before I throw questions out to the floor, what have you spent with Alae-Carew?
So we just announced an AR board game that we're working on. So actually we're working on 2 AR board games that we announced. One is Takenoko, which comes out February 28th. Takenoko is a physical board game about, it's slightly competitive, about growing bamboo with a farmer and then having a panda which eats that bamboo. It's a really fun, cozy game. We've been working on taking the Steam digital version of that board game and applying it to a device called Tilt 5, which is an AR device where you have a board, you wear glasses, and then you can see these holograms on that board. It's been a really fun project to work on, just with these holograms and a new kind of form of interaction, which is part physical, part digital. And we're also...
You might have seen it in the news, because we demoed it to the Prime Minister and his wife like 2 weeks ago, which is a weird thing to be asked. But yeah, number 10. But yeah, I mean, we have some projects coming out, and I think us as a studio, the way that we're trying to grow, because we are trying to scale, we are trying to become like, I think there's a lot of small studios that are doing really cool stuff, and it is important that we start to get some bigger studios, and we're hoping long term that we can be a big studio in Glasgow in Scotland, kind of help bring more into the region. It's for us, like, we're trying to grow multiple parts of the business. We want to do our original stuff, but we also want to grow the idea of bringing IPs into the region, like things that are local, like doing Catan, doing Takenoko, like those are names that are interesting and different technologies. So it's kind of almost like setting up 2 parts of the business, and we continue to grow that to bring those types of projects in, but then also be using that as a springboard for our own stuff. So hopefully over the coming years, that's going to be where we're going to be pushing into that, and then with the film and TV angle as well, hopefully all coming together. So there's a lot of hopefuls in this. But all of these things can come together, but sustaining ourselves through doing interesting projects that are allowing us to bring in new talent. Like as Justin was saying, like we have very strong links with universities, and hopefully we can start bringing more talent into the industry through these things. So yeah, like ultimately, hopefully we're
Have we got any questions?
First, obviously, it jumps to mind, revenue with Contemporary, right? They have a massive project for Microsoft. They did incredible work, but kind of fell flat, right? And I personally believe it's because gaming is an active kind of media, and TV is a passive kind of media. And if you want do one, you don't necessarily want the other at the same time. But I'm sure you guys took a lot of pointers from that experience. So what would you be doing differently?
I think it's interesting because also there's so much just in games or shows which are good or not, and there's so many. Like if you just took, if I picked a random Wikipedia article of a TV show, there's a very high chance that will be a bad show. So there's definitely there's always a creative element to it, which is risky. I think what's interesting is potentially, not every IP needs to be transmedia, and that's also where we look at in terms of story worlds. So looking at building the world and how connected is that to a single story, and how connected is that to be the world, with the world being interesting. So if you are finding that you are building an interesting world, that's prime for multiple expressions. If you're finding that actually this is a character-focused story, which is really interesting, then maybe that's not the best one. It's interesting actually, The Last of Us being a character-driven experience that has actually translated well in both media, because they have focused on that character story. So it is kind of me contradicting myself in a way, but I think in both examples, obviously huge budgets, and they did very well artistically in both expressions. But generally, I think I'd be more interested in some of those worlds. So another world that comes to mind is League of Legends, which I think is an interesting one actually, because although I'm not a big League of Legends player, the worlds felt quite kind of disjointed as I played it. And yeah, admittedly, I haven't read the lore, so this is why it feels disjointed. But you have, like a samurai and a robot. What are they doing in the same world? But on the other hand, you're able to, from that, build something like Arcane, where it starts to make sense. So you're getting some of that character recognition. So again, something that I suppose the key takeaway for me is kind of looking at that world in which stories can be told, and then looking at the best mediums for those stories.
Could I ask an addition? Sorry. Is that because you made a differentiation earlier between expanding the brand, let's say, of LP, and the transmedia brand itself, as if they were two different entities. And I think that League of Legends is one of the expanding everything, and The Last of Us as well. Something more cohesive, I guess, like Metal Gear Solid, right? In which they have little like full episodes of cutscenes that could be filmed instead of the game, right? But how would you actually make it work? Because it is definitely so.
I suppose when exploring that franchise expansion model, I'm mainly talking about a funding model and a risk model. Is the case of traditionally. Let's invest, if I'm looking at being a film funder, let's invest in 10 different films, and then the one that does really well, let's build a game, let's expand from there, versus looking at 10 different IPs, which you have each individually multiple expressions, which could de-risk your whole portfolio. So again, kind of from a financial portfolio perspective, I wouldn't say that there is anything in my opinion, but again, I'm also not an expert, but nothing fundamentally different in the creative expressions that will happen in franchise expansion versus transmedia. And sometimes there's a danger, and also I highlighted the Quantum Break as the example, a danger of looking at too close ties which don't necessarily make sense, because there is that audience overlap, there's that consumer overlap. Sometimes you're better off doing a web comic or a YouTube series than it is. And there's some really interesting things that, like, transmedia can be fortnight marketing campaigns in the run up to the next season, and really a company investing in some of the media to build up their brand. So that there's I suppose there are multiple ways of creatively doing it. But I do think from franchise expansion versus transmedia model, it's more just about changing investor perception to do them kind of simultaneously.
I think also there's an element of I don't know enough about Quantum Break to speak about it, but I'd love to know how involved and how separate those things were from a creative point of view, like who was making the TV series, who was making the game, whether there was crossover there. Like, you look at the two most recent successes, The Last of Us, like Neil Druckmann, the game director, directing episodes of that TV show, was very involved in Arcane, and the studio were very involved in that. They were like, there's an element there of people that were there, were qualified enough and knew enough and were well enough, they can transfer that over and bring those skills and do that well, versus something else where you're handing off, like say The Witcher, which was very famous. All these kind of stories were coming out that everyone would write and hate the source material, and that caused a lot of issues. It doesn't have the authenticity that you want from that. So really into that lore, that world, you don't really want to hear that the people that made this thing didn't make it for you. So I think there is an element there of scaling up in games that we need people that are capable of crossing over those if you're going to do them. If it's a game to film, or if it's a film to game thing, like you do want this kind of central creative that's controls that lore and can bring those things together, because otherwise it's going to be inauthentic. And I think that's an important thing that fans of either of them will bring.
I remember a couple of months back there was a job advert for Rising Zero Dawn for experts, and that was the whole job was just to look at the lore, look at the stories, and archive it all. That was the singular job.
Yeah, it's interesting. Keepers of the Lord from earlier, and that kind of that central curator of it. What I find fascinating about The Witcher is that the TV show was successful, and it's funny because I as a fan of the books and the games was really frustrated by the expression, but it goes to show some of the different audience dynamics, and so finding someone, I think, finding someone who understands both is crucial.
I was wondering if you had one piece of advice you would generally for the and the development studios coming up. What would be any advice?
As Karina was saying earlier, socialise. There is a good network, and I think it's important to kind of use the network around. I know that there's groups that meet locally, potentially run by some people that are here, and there's good Discord communities now. There's a lot of stuff out there, and I think that is what I always find with a lot of indies, especially the ones that are coming out of the university, is that they know how to do their function, they know how to do art or design, but they don't know how to run business, they don't know how to do any of those other things, and there's so many gaps, and you're running a company the size that we have, there's still so many gaps, and we have to wear 10 hats, and a lot of our staff have to wear multiple hats because we're trying to fill all those gaps, and it's unlikely one person or even just a team of 3 people will ever be able to do that, so you do need to look out to ensure that you have access to the resources that you have access to. I genuinely, if people reach out to us, we do usually reply, and if an email comes in or someone wants to talk to us or come to the studio and chat or whatever, we're generally very open for that kind of thing. I hope the same is true of anyone else in any of the other studios in Glasgow. It helps us all if we kind of raise things up. So yeah, that's generally it for me, is try and find other people with the experience and just tap into that as much as possible.
I suppose to add to that from which is obviously a kind of financial aspect, depends on where you are as an indie company, and kind of there are multiple paths to success, or I should say to productivity in the games market. And I think coming out of university versus getting into the games industry versus being in the industry and then wanting to start an industry, these are all different approaches, and kind of your advice on each really depends on where your starting base is. One of the interesting dynamics I think in the indie space in games is you have so many successful studios which started because of people in their spare time or part-time working other jobs, then seeing success after the release or after getting to quite a considerable milestone, then getting funding. And I think it's a tricky phase at the start of a business when to get funding. I think as Sammy mentioned, kind of publishers being risk averse. So I suppose my advice for anyone in an indie is look for other sources of income to sustain you until you have something that you're really and then either push it out yourself with some support of some experienced people, or you seek funding when you have something that you're proud of.
I think there can be a little bit of a stigma to that as well. Like, Justin saying, like, seeking other work to support what you're doing. Like, a lot of people feel we should go and start a company, get money for that, and just run with it. And the reality is, like, loads of studios, most studios of any reasonable size are doing other work to support what they're trying to achieve. Because especially if you're a new studio, you're unproven. If you don't have like veterans on your staff, you see that all the time when a new studio gets funded. It's always like Ubisoft and EA staff get funding for 50 million to make this, and it's like fantastic, that's great. But if you don't have that, you don't have the credibility to get that kind of investment. Like, you're going to need to build yourself up doing other things. So do focus on the other stuff you can do. Do find those kind of ways to make money to continue to fund these other things that you actually want to get to.
It's not really game specific, but someone told me once that the average age of a successful startup founder is 40. Which I think is really interesting. Now, this was, again, not game specific, just general. So the model for many industries is working in an industry, build up your contacts, build up your experience, and then do something on your own. And you're really building yourself a much more stable foundation. But because of these startups and their success, you sometimes feel that me, fresh grad coming out of uni, I can do it too. Without understanding that potentially there's some more things to it. I mean, yeah, not to say that it can't be done, and actually it has been done many times. But I thought that data point was an interesting one.
I'll wrap up here because I've got a feeling there might be food on the other side of the wall. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for coming. You'll stay, get some more drinks, get some food, have a chat with everybody. Thank you again to Barclays for being our sponsors after awesomeness of the lovely Eagle Lab. And thank you to all our speakers.